Limitations. We all face them, but what if I told you that these barriers might be more malleable than we think? Today we're diving into Dr. Jonathan Toomer's theory of limitation, because it just might change how you view your own potential.
Oh, that's an intriguing concept. I'm curious to hear more about this theory and how it might apply to our lives.
Well, at its core, Dr. Toomer's theory suggests that while we all encounter forces that hinder us from achieving our goals, the real question is, are these limitations real, or are they just constructs of our minds?
That's a profound question. I mean, we all feel limited at times, but I've never really stopped to consider whether those limitations are actually real or just in our heads.
Exactly. And that's where it gets interesting. Dr. Toomer breaks down limitations into several categories. Let's start with personal limitations. These can be boundaries we set for ourselves, or physical limitations like disabilities.
So, like, if someone refuses to lend money to friends, that could be a personal limitation.
Precisely, that's a perfect example. And it's just the tip of the iceberg. Dr. Toomer also talks about other limitations like ignorance, beliefs, and inconsistency.
Ignorance, I can understand. If you don't know something, it definitely limits you. But beliefs? How do our beliefs limit us?
Well, it's fascinating, really. Our beliefs shape our thoughts, which create patterns, then habits, actions, and ultimately our character and destiny. So if we believe we can't do something, we're essentially creating a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Wow, that's a powerful concept. It makes me wonder about all the things I might be limiting myself from doing just because of what I believe about myself.
Exactly. And then there's inconsistency. Imagine someone who has all the knowledge and information they need, but they're inconsistent in applying it. That inconsistency becomes their limitation. It's not about what they know, but how they use it.
Oh, I can definitely relate to that. You know, I've had times where I knew exactly what I needed to do, but couldn't seem to stick with it consistently. It's frustrating when you realize you're holding yourself back.
Absolutely. And then there are external factors like relationships, fear, poverty, and family background. These can all create significant barriers in our lives. For example, some families have negative histories that seem to repeat things like crime, joblessness, or substance abuse.
That sounds like it could be really challenging to overcome. If you're born into a situation like that, how do you even begin to break free from those limitations?
That's where Dr. Toomer's work gets really interesting. He provides some incredibly inspiring examples of people who've overcome seemingly insurmountable limitations. Take Frida Kahlo, for instance. She suffered from polio and spina bifida, but became one of the most famous artists of all time.
I've always admired Frida Kahlo's work, but I had no idea she faced such significant physical challenges. That's truly inspiring.
It really is. And then there's Stephen Hawking, diagnosed with ALS at 21 and given just 2 years to live. He went on to become a world-renowned physicist and lived until he was 76. Despite being paralysed from head to toe for over 30 years, he continued his groundbreaking work in theoretical physics.
These stories are incredible. It really puts our everyday challenges into perspective, doesn't it? What do you think these individuals have that allows them to push past their limitations?
Well, Dr. Toomer suggests it's all about mindset. He argues that while the theory of limitation is real, we can be anything we put our minds to. It's about personal decisions and believing that all things are possible. These inspiring individuals didn't let their circumstances define them. Instead, they redefined what was possible.
So it's not about denying that limitations exist, but rather about choosing how we respond to them. That's a powerful shift in perspective.
Exactly. It's about arming our minds with a resolve to defy the odds. And it's not just about these famous examples. Dr. Toomer points out that every day there are many similar stories surrounding us that we don't know about.
I'm curious, though. How do we start applying this in our own lives? It's one thing to hear about these extraordinary people, but how do we cultivate that mindset for ourselves?
That's a great question. I think it starts with awareness. We need to recognize the limitations we've accepted in our lives, whether they're self-imposed or external. Once we're aware of them, we can start challenging them. It's about questioning our assumptions and then taking action.
So, if I believe I'm not good at public speaking, I should challenge that belief and maybe start by speaking up more in meetings.
Precisely. It's about pushing your boundaries bit by bit. It's not about suddenly becoming fearless, but about slowly expanding your comfort zone. And remember, it's okay to fail. Many of the examples Dr. Tuma gives are of people who face numerous setbacks. The key is to keep going, to learn from each experience, and use it to fuel your growth.
That's a really encouraging message. It's not about being perfect or never facing obstacles, but about perseverance and believing in your ability to overcome.
Absolutely. And I think that's the core of Dr. Tuma's theory. Limitations are real, but they're not insurmountable. With the right mindset and determination, we can achieve things we never thought possible.
This conversation has been incredibly inspiring. It really makes you think about the limitations you've accepted in your own life and how you might start challenging them.
Definitely. And it's important to note that this applies to all kinds of limitations. Dr. Tuma talks about how even things like ignorance can be a limitation. If we lack knowledge in a certain area, it's like being blind to part of our environment. But when we acquire that knowledge, it's like recovering our sight.
That's an interesting analogy. It really emphasizes how empowering knowledge can be.
Exactly. And it's not just about academic knowledge, it's about understanding ourselves, our beliefs, and the world around us. Dr. Tuma also discusses how our relationships can be a source of limitation or empowerment.
I can see how that would be true. I've definitely had relationships that held me back and others that pushed me to be better.
Absolutely. And it's not just personal relationships. Our relationship with society, with our work, with our own bodies, all of these can create limitations or opportunities for growth. It's about recognizing these dynamics and making conscious choices about how we engage with them.
This theory seems to touch on so many aspects of life. Are there any other key points from Dr. Tuma's work that we haven't covered yet?
Actually, yes. He talks about how being too comfortable can be a limitation. Some people become so content with their current situation that they stop pushing themselves to grow or improve. On the flip side, there are those who become comfortable with discomfort, accepting poor conditions rather than striving for change.
That's a really interesting point. I can see how both of those mindsets could hold someone back from reaching their full potential.
Exactly. And it ties back to the idea of mindset being crucial. Whether we're facing physical limitations, societal barriers, or our own self-imposed restrictions, our approach to these challenges can make all the difference.
So what's the takeaway here? How can our listeners start applying this theory of limitation to their own lives?
Well, I think the key is to start questioning the limitations we've accepted. Look at the areas of your life where you feel stuck or restricted. Ask yourself, is this a real, immovable barrier? Or is it something I can work to overcome? Then start taking small steps to push those boundaries.
And I suppose it's important to remember those inspiring examples we talked about earlier. If they could overcome such significant challenges, surely we can tackle our own obstacles.
Absolutely. It's about cultivating that resilience and determination. Remember, as Dr. Tuma says, we can be anything we put our minds to. It's not about denying the existence of limitations, but about refusing to let them define us.
This has been such an enlightening discussion. I feel like I'm going to be thinking about this for days to come.
I'm glad you found it as fascinating as I did, and I hope our listeners feel the same way. Remember, whatever limitations you're facing, they don't have to define you. You have the power to rewrite your story. As we wrap up, I can't help but wonder what limitations will humanity push past in the coming years. The possibilities are truly exciting.
Well said. And on that empowering note, I think it's time we close our show. This has been another thought-provoking episode of Gen FM.
Indeed it has. Thank you all for listening. And remember, the only true limitations are the ones we accept. Keep pushing those boundaries and defying those odds. We'll catch you on the next episode of Gen FM.